Um, my name's Casey. So actually, I'll follow up directly on that. If it's the discovery of detrimental effects, absolutely, it's not necessarily that anybody did anything wrong, right? And we can start with the assumption that everybody made reasonable decisions. I'll add a model that, for me, helps clarify why, and that's that when engineers have problems, we can assume that they're going to solve those problems. The signal for which problems to solve can be thought of as falling somewhere within a triangle of cost, performance, and safety. And so the signal for cost is usually very apparent. For performance, most of us know how to dig that out. And for safety, usually the signal doesn't exist. So great if autonomous cars, if you live in a culture of safety, that's a little bit different from the world that most of us live in software. So part of what Chaos did, especially early Chaos, Chaos Monkey, is it took the safety signal and put that in front of the engineers, terminating an instance every day during business hours so that it had their attention. And that's what gave the power to keep them as they were maintaining applications and adding features, things that we don't usually think of as being designed because this is just part of the life cycle of an application. It prevents them from drifting into the cost-efficient or performance-efficient realm and creates a better tension because you get the signal for safety, whether or not stuff is safe. Language is also important to me, so or wording. Okay, I'm just pedantic. I'll mention a couple word choices that have stood out to me so far. I try to always say chaos experimentation and not testing, because testing, strictly speaking, does not create new knowledge. You have an assertion about a property that you already know or can imagine, and a test just validates whether or not that assertion is true. Experimentation creates new knowledge, right? You have a hypothesis. If something disproves that, well, then all you know is that that's not true, and you have to go figure out what actually happened. So they all exist within the realm of QA, but there's a lot of testing, of course, do that. And then experimentation, I think, has a different flavor. I keep hearing failure injection, like we do failure injection. Just want to remind you that a good chunk of chaos engineering isn't failure injection. Like if you have a bunch of customers come to your app, I'd have a hard time calling that a failure, right? And it might be that nothing happens at all, but you still can learn some systemic effect. And so that necessarily shouldn't be called a failure. It might be something more neutral or good. And verification versus validation. The way I think of it, chaos engineering is more about verification of system behavior, like at the boundary of the system. We care about whether or not something works. We don't necessarily care about whether it works. So chaos engineering is verification, not validation. Validation wants to make sure that the model, that it actually does what we think it does. Particularly important with things like the automatic driving is a good example. And I think software in general is going to that area where it's not going to be possible for you to validate that software works the way that you think it should, because under the hood, it's just too complex. So instead, that in my mind, that adds value to chaos engineering long term, because it's the art of doing verification, which will still be important and possible. Those are my thoughts.